Hold on. My camera is frozen. So let's see about that. Well, my camera is frozen. Deactivate the cam source in OBS and reactivate. Okay, so how do I do that? Webcam. Click on the little cog. I'm trying to learn here, guys. What cog? The one on the video capture device? No. Hold on. Webcam. Video capture device. Cog. Okay. Deactivate. Activate. Ha ha ha! V saves the day! Thank you, V. It was stressing me out a little bit. It's tough. I opened that window for thank you. Oh, it happens all the time. Thank you. That means so much to me. Thank you for helping me. Hey, Cookie. Hey, Kathy. There's a couple more people in chat, but I don't want to out them. They haven't commented yet. Kathy, Cookie, V. And there's maybe one more. And the doggo has a toy because, I'm talking. And cheers to everyone for joining me on the stream. Cheers, ears. This is a little more hard cider tonight. Elderflower. I'm really liking it. So it's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. How is everybody? How is everybody? Let me turn up the sound here a little bit. Ooh, I have new music. Let's try to go to my lo-fi. This isn't the new music, though. I have some new suspense background music. It's gonna be amazing. Kathy, are you recovering from your outage? Your outing? I shouldn't say outage. It wasn't really an outage. Your outing? I know you went to bed early last night and we're not around for the reading. I was trying to read Kathy to sleep, but she already went to sleep. And then I just missed reading the lesser Wapple. Well, not the least Wapple, because the least Wapple, that's Joe. But the lesser Wapple. So today's been a kind of a goofy day. I had the most wonderful surprise today. I was driving to work, and Salty called me on my way to work. She never calls me on my way to work because she knows I listen to lectures and things to get prepared to lecture. And she called me, and I was like, hey, you never call me. And she's like, oh, I just wanted to call you and see how you're doing. Oh, doctor's appointment today. Was it just checkup stuff, or did you get more stuff that makes you sicker? That is good, good, good. Angry Orchard. Not Angry Orchards. This is called Wicked Grove. It's the Aldi knockoff, I think, of Angry Orchard, but it's pretty damn tasty. It's pretty tasty. Not gonna lie. Pretty tasty. So anyway, Salty called me, and I was just happy to talk to her, and, talking on our way to work. And she's like, well, where do you park when you normally go to work? Oh, I could have told you weren't dead, Kathy. Sheesh. I mean, normally dead people don't talk and type. I mean, I don't know a lot, but I don't think that's normal. And she said, well, where do you normally park? I said, I normally park up here. And what, where do you, blah, blah. So about 2 minutes before my off-ramp, boom, big old rock comes off the windshield, and I get this freaking dime-sized crack in my windshield. And I was like, son of a bitch, And you can see the dog tail, and she's trying to get, I got it. I got a cactus. I got a cactus, and you don't have a cactus. Want a cactus? Can't have a cactus. Want a cactus? Can't have a cactus. All right, you can have a cactus. And so I was like, oh, son of a bitch. And she's like, oh, should I let you go? I'm like, yeah, because I'm all freaking out. Anxiety goes through the roof, and I got to get a new windshield, and I know they got to recalibrate it because it's got blah, 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 blah. And I pull into the parking lot and start Googling things, before my class to see if I can get it fixed today. And she knocked on my window. She was waiting for me at my work. I met her at work. We don't work together, and she's not paid for by the same people, but she works on the campuses sometimes. And so I got to see her, and I did my best to just put that shit aside, be in the moment, and see her, check out her butt, things like that, because I have priorities. And I gave her a smooch, V. 2 smooches. 2 smooches. But not 3, because she gets handsy at 3. And we were in the parking lot. You never know with her, man. She just gets outright ruthless. So I got to see Salty today, and then I went after, and they were able to repair the window. You can still sort of see it. I do get handsy. I get handsy with any smooches. Just get crazy. And so they were able to fix it, $75, which I thought was not too bad, considering a replacement is $1,200. I was like, holy crap. The last windshield I got replaced was not one that had to be recalibrated, but it was only $300. But this is way before COVID. I used to have a Honda Element. And, that's true too, Kathy. That's true too. But only with Jim, not with you. Not with you, no. Not anymore. Not after the restraining order. I was like, no, ma'am. No, ma'am. That is not okay. And so, yeah, I got the repair done. I didn't have to pay $1,200, which is good. It's on the passenger side. He said it couldn't fix it if it was on the driver's side because it would obstruct your vision. I can be bribed. Both of us. Why not both? Why not both, V? Do we need a shrug command? Would the shrug have like the thing you always send me, V, where the person doing like this? I've been looking at doing a countdown timer for the beginning of the stream. All right, I can add that command, V. And yeah, so not a bad day. Sat down to stream, and then my camera was like locked, and I'm like, oh God, and then V to the rescue. Life is good. I do have a new dice bag prototype to show you guys. Jim laughed and tell you he's a southpaw. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. A new dice bag prototype to show you guys. Well, it's the same type of dice bag, but new material. Some of you may have seen this before. This is. Oh, thank you, V. Perfect. Perfect. If you type exclamation point dice bag, you can be taken to where you can buy this dice bag. Support the stream. Support the Dio. This is made from automobile leather. I'm getting upcycled automobile leather sent to me from Detroit, from the Big Three, from a company called Pingree Detroit. And we are partnering for some things. There's some things coming out. If you've been watching my Instagram, you can follow the Instagrams below. I've been talking about that, but they're going to keep sending me leather, and I'm going to keep making the dice bags. This is rolled top, red stitch, metal closure, cotton, waxed with eyelets. Holds about 85 dice. And you can fit your hand in there, and it stands up on your table. So that you can have your dice in there, and the dice bag stands up, and it's all good. But I wanted to show you guys that. There is also a Kathy Wapple supporting dice bag. Little bit of dragon skin leather. So pretty. So fancy. Yeah, so we've got those coming out. Oh, they're already out, but I can make them for you. They're made to order. The leather from the car automobile does not come in red. Right now I only have black. I can get whatever. And yeah, it's the same run I had before, Kathy. It's the same run that I had before when I did 5 Cobalt ones that were a short run, and then I sold all those. I made another 5 and sold all those, so I just decided to put it up all the time. Yeah, so it's not the link that we gave above. Look around. You'll see the Cobalt ones there. A percentage of that goes to support Kathy Wapple. So, yeah, support me. Support Kathy. Get a special bag for your dice. It's because I have cancer. No, it's because you need to buy more paint and start streaming again. And to buy you a new microphone so that you have that silky sound, Kathy Wapple. Oh, and put up with Cookie. Yeah, all of us should get dice bags for putting up with Cookie. All right. Yeah, you can follow that link right there, the one that just came up for dice bags. All right, tonight we are going to read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. We're going to try to get through it all. If we do not, we will finish it next week, and we will build D&D next week. Build monsters and things like this. I've been sort of looking around at stat blocks for the Headless Horseman, and he is there's a lot of different ideas on what he should be. So start thinking about it. What we're going to do as we go through is anytime there's a description for 3 people here, the Cookie, that's one for you. No, the first one we're going to do is the Headless Horseman himself. We might have to do his horse, but I think we should do them together. Keep them together somehow. I don't want to play with that, baby. That's your toy. And the second one is Ichabod Crane himself. We'll do an NPC for him. And the third one is Brahm Bones. I want to do an NPC for Brahm Bones. And we'll get it done. Stop dropping that stupid thing. I guess this is going to be all stream. Just bring you the toy, drop the toy loud. Salty, if you can hear me, I blame you for this cactus I have here. So, what we're going to be doing is highlighting anytime that any of these people are described so that we can bring that over when we build later. Okay? Boy, I need to change up those timers so that they're not all on top of each other like that. They're important, but geez. Throw a toy for her already. No. She won't give it to you. It's always the throw it, but don't touch it. So, yeah, she... Oh! All right, here we go. There she goes. She has it. No take, only throw. All right, I threw it because Kathy told me to. All right, let's get some reading going here, kids. I have a new windscreen, V. Look, here, I'll show it to you. A new windscreen to make my voice so silky smooth. Hopefully it's better. We'll see how it goes. It's supposed to cut down on my sibilance. I think I have a lot of sibilance. So if you ASMR, we don't hear you breathing. Yeah, hold on, let's try it. Is it working? Does it work? I don't know. We'll have to see how it works. No, stop that. I have headphones on. Gross. All right, let's get some reading done, and we'll highlight as we go, because we can highlight in this program, and I think it saves it. We'll see how it goes. I'm unsure. Let us switch over to our ambience music. I have some suspense ambience. We'll see how this goes. Let me know how the levels are, and we will go from there. They're probably pretty good. They were pretty good last time. Found among the papers of the late Dietrich Knickerbocker. Hey, I got that name right. I didn't butcher the last name. I think I need another command of Dio butchers names and places terribly. A similar one that Acid Burn has. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. Okay, I can move this around. I just can't shrink it. Okay, cool. Is it a special trademark Dio Shred Rag? No, these are just ones I use at the gym. This is a clean one. Yeah, I'm going to start selling my bath water and stuff like that on my OnlyFans. My Only Flaps. In fact, I think we might raid into Viva La Dungeon tonight. We'll see how it goes. Found amongst the papers of the late Dietrich Knickerbocker. A pleasing land of drowsy head it was, of dreams that wave before the half-shut eye, and of gay castles in the clouds that pass, forever flushing round a summer sky. Castle of Indolence. Gay castles, everybody. I had no idea castles could be gay. But if I were to have a castle, I'd want a gay one. In the bosom of one of the most spacious coves which indent the eastern shore of the Hudson, at that broad expansion of the river dominated by the ancient Dutch navigators, the Tappan Zee, and where they always prudently shortened sail and implored the protection of St. Nicholas when they crossed, there lies a small market town or rural port, which is called by some Greensburg, but which is generally and more properly known by the name of Tarrytown. Look what, Kathy? What am I looking at? The town of Tarrytown? We can't look at it, Kathy. It's a story. I don't think you understand how these work. Tarrytown stories. This name was given, we are told, in former days by the good housewives of the adjacent country, from the inveterate propensity of their husbands to linger about the village tavern on market days. Be that as it may, I do not vouch for the fact, but merely advert for it, for the sake of being precise and authentic. Not far from this village, perhaps about 2 miles, there is a little valley, or rather lap of land, amongst the high hills, which is one of the quietest places in the whole world. The small brook glides through it with just enough to lull one to repose, and the occasional whistle of a quail or tapping of a woodpecker is almost the only sound that ever breaks in upon the uniform tranquility. I don't know. I'll have to learn how to butcher. You know what? I can figure out a butcher counter. I have a dead counter set up already, so I will build one of those after stream. I recollect that, when a stripling, my first exploit in squirrel shooting was in a grove of tall walnut trees that shades one side of the valley. I had wandered into it at noontime, when all nature is peculiarly quiet, and was startled by the roar of my own gun as it broke the Sabbath stillness around and was prolonged and reverberated by the angry echoes. If ever I should wish for a retreat whither I might steal from the world and its distractions and dream quietly away the remnant of a troubled life, I know none more promising than this little valley. From the listless repose of this place, and the peculiar character of its inhabitants, who are descendants from the original Dutch settlers, this sequestered glen has long been known by the name of Sleepy Hollow, and its rustic lads are called Sleepy Hollow boys throughout all the neighboring country. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere. Some say that the place was bewitched by a high German doctor during the early days of the settlement. Others, that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrick Hudson. Certain it is, the place still continues under the sway of some witching power, that it holds spell over the minds of the good people, causing them to walk in a continual reverie. They are given to all kinds of marvelous beliefs, and subject to trances and visions, and frequently see strange sights, and hear music and voices in the air. The whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Stars shoot and meteors glare, oftener across the valley than in any other part of the world. And the nightmare, with her whole ninefold, to make it the favorite scene of her gambles. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region, and seems to be commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air, is the apparition of a figure on horseback without a head. It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper. So I want to highlight that. Ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head was carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, and who is ever and anon seen by the country folk hurrying along in the gloom of night as if on wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley, but extend at times to the adjacent roads, and especially to the vicinity of a church at no great distance. Indeed, certain of the most authentic historians of these parts, who have been careful in collecting and collating the floating facts concerning this specter, allege that the body of the trooper have been buried in the churchyard. The ghost rides forth to the scene of battle in nightly quest of his head, and that the rushing speed with he sometimes passes along the hollow like a midnight blast is owing to his being belated and in a hurry to get back to the churchyard before daybreak. Hello, Gren, no cookies. Gren was doing pixel art this morning. I seen it. Such is the general purpose of this legendary superstition, which has furnished materials for many a wild story in the region of shadows. And the specter is known at all the country firesides by the name of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. It is remarkable that the visionary propensity I have mentioned is not confined to the native inhabitants of the valley, but is unconsciously imbibed by everyone who resides there for a time. However wide awake they may have been before they entered that sleepy region, they are sure, in a little time, to inhale the witching influence of the air, and begin to grow imaginative, to dream dreams, to see apparitions. I mention this peaceful spot with all possible laud, for it is in such a little retired Dutch valleys, found here and there and bosomed by the great state of New York, that population, manners, and customs remain fixed, while the great torrent of migration and improvement which is making such incessant changes on other parts of the restless country sleeps by them unobserved. They are like those little nooks of still water which border a rapid stream, where we may see straw and bubble riding quietly at anchor, or slowly revolving in their mimic harbor, undisturbed by the rush of the passing current. Though many years have elapsed since I trod the drowsy shades of Sleepy Hollow, yet I question whether I should not find the same trees and the same familiar vegetating in its sheltered bosom. The same families vegetating in its sheltered bosom. It is in this byplace of nature there abode in a remote period of the American history, that is to say some 30 years since, a worthy wight of the name Ichabod Crane, who sojourned, or as he expressed it, tarried in Sleepy Hollow for the purpose of instructing children in the vicinity. He was a native of Connecticut, a state which supplies the Union with pioneers for the mind as well as for the forest, and sends forth yearly its legions of frontier woodsmen and country schoolmasters. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to this person. He was tall but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, and hands that dangled out a mile to his sleeves, feet that might have served as shovels, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. His head was small and flat at the top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose, so that it looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell you which way the wind blew. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day with his baggy clothes fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. His schoolhouse was at, hold on. Okay, I don't know what that said. His schoolhouse was a low building of one large room, rudely constructed. He's a muppet. Yeah, he's a muppet. Who knows? I want to know what that said. Okay, nothing. I'm still learning. Guys. His schoolhouse was a low building of one large room, rudely constructed of logs. The windows partly glazed and partly patched with leaves of old copybooks. It was most ingeniously secured at vacant hours by a withy twisted in the handle of the door, and its stakes set against the window shutters, so that though a thief might get in with perfect ease, he should find some embarrassment at getting out. An idea most probably borrowed by the architect, Joost van Houten, from the mystery from an eel pot. Though the schoolhouse stood in a rather lonely but pleasant situation, just at the front of a woody hill with a brook running close by and a formidable birch tree growing at one end of it. From hence the low murmur of his pupils' voices, conning over their lessons, might be heard in a drowsy summer's day, like the hum of a beehive, interrupted now and then by an authoritative voice of the master, in one tone of menace or command, or peradventure by the appalling sound of the birch, as he urged some tardy loiterer along the flowery path of knowledge. Truth to say, he was a conscientious man, and ever bore in mind the golden maxim, spare the rod and spoil the child. Ichabod Crane's scholars certainly were not spoiled. I would not have imagined, however, he was one of those cruel potentates of the school who joy in the smart of their subjects. On the contrary, he administered justice with discrimination rather than severity, taking the burden off the backs of the weak and laying it on those of the strong. Your mere puny stripling that winced at the least flourish of the rod was passed by with indulgence, but the claims of justice were satisfied by inflicting a double portion on some little tough, wrong-headed, broad-skirted Dutch urchin who sulked and swelled and grew dogged and sullen beneath the birch. And this he called doing the duty by their parents. And he never inflicted a chastisement without following it by the assurance so consolatory to the smarting urchin that he would remember it and thank him for it the longest day he had to live. When the school hours were over, he was even the companion and playmate of the larger boys. On the holiday afternoons, he would convey some of the smaller ones home who happened to have pretty sisters or good housewives for mothers, noted for the comforts of their cupboard. Indeed, it behooved him to keep on good terms with his pupils. The revenue arising from his school was small, and would have been scarcely sufficient to furnish him with daily bread, for he was a huge feeder, and though lank, had the dilating powers of an anaconda. But to help out his maintenance, he was, according to country custom in those parts, boarded and lodged at the house of the farmers whose children he instructed. With these he lived successively a week at a time, thus going the rounds of the neighborhood with all his worldly effects tied up in a cotton handkerchief. That all this might not be too onerous on the purses of the rustic patrons who are apt to consider the cost of schooling a grievous burden, and schoolmasters as mere drones, he had various ways of rendering himself both useful and agreeable. He assisted the farmers occasionally in their lighter labors of the farms, helped to make hay, mended the fences, took the horses to water, drove the cows from pasture, and cut wood for the winter fire. He laid aside, too, all the dominant dignity of the absolute sway with which he lorded his little empire, the school, and became wonderfully gentle and ingratiating. He found favors in the eyes of the mothers by petting the children, particularly the youngest, and like the lion bold, which whilom so magnanimously the lamb did hold, he would sit up with a child on one knee and rock a cradle with his foot for whole hours together. In addition to other vocations, he was the singing master of the neighborhood, and picked up many a bright shilling by instructing the young folks in psalmody. It was a matter of no little vanity to him on Sundays to take his station in front of the church gallery with a band of chosen singers, where, in his own mind, he completely carried away the palm from the parson. Certain it is, his voice resounded far above the rest of the congregation, and there are peculiar quavers still to be heard in that church, which may be heard a half-mile off, quite to the opposite side of the mill pond on a Sunday morning, which are said to be legitimately descended from the nose of Ichabod Crane. Thus, by divers little makeshifts in that ingenious way is commonly denominated by hook and by crook, the worthy pedagogy got on tolerably enough, and was thought by all who understood nothing of the labor of headwork to have wonderfully easy life of it. The schoolmaster is generally a man of some importance in the female circle of a rural neighborhood, being considered a kind of idle gentleman-like parsonage of vastly superior taste and accomplishments to the rough country swains, and indeed inferior in learning only to the parson. His appearance, therefore, is apt to occasion some little stir at the tea-table of a farmhouse, and the addition of a supernumerary dish of cakes or sweetmeats, or peradventure, the parade of a silver teapot. Our man of letters, therefore, was peculiarly happy in the smiles of all the country damsels. How he would figure among them in the churchyard between services on Sundays, gathering grapes for them from the wild vines that overran the surrounding trees, reciting for their amusement all of the epitaphs on the tombstones, or sauntering with a whole bevy of them along the banks of the adjacent mill pond, while the more bashful country bumpkins hung sheepishly back, envying his superior elegance and address. From his half-itinerant life, also, hey, scroll keeper, good to see you, buddy. Glad to see you're here. From his half-itinerant life, he was a kind of traveling gazette, carrying the whole budget of local gossip from house to house, so that his appearance was always greeted with satisfaction. He was, moreover, esteemed by the women as a man of great erudition, for he had read several books quite thorough, and was a perfect master of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, in which, by the way, he was most firmly and potently believed. So, this is actually a book, and I have downloaded it. So I was thinking at some point we would read a little bit from that. Not tonight, but at some point. These are the stories of witchcraft on the East Coast. In fact, Cotton Mathers wrote about the Salem witch trials. So if it's not boring as shit, I'll have to take a look through it, see what goes on. Yeah. He was, in fact, an odd mixture of small shrewdness and simple credulity. His appetite for the marvelous and his powers of digesting it were equally extraordinary, and both had been increased by his residence in this spellbound region. No tale was too gross or monstrous for his capacious swallow. It was often his delight, after his school was dismissed in the afternoon, to stretch himself on a rich bed of clover bordering the little brook that whimpered by his schoolhouse, and there con over Mather's direful tales, until the gathering dusk of the evening made the printed page a mere mist before his eyes. Then, as he wended his way by swamp and stream and awful woodland to the farmhouse where he happened to be quartered, every sound of nature at that witching hour fluttered his excited imagination. The moan of the whippoorwill from the hillside, the boding cry of the tree toad, the harbinger of a storm, and dreary hooting of the screech owl, or sudden rustling of the thicket of birds frightened from their roost. The fireflies, too, which sparked most vividly in the darkest places, now and then startled him, as one of the uncommon brightness would stream across his path, as if by chance a huge blockhead of beetle came winging his blundering flight against him. The poor varlet was ready to give up the ghost, with the idea that he was struck with a witch's token. His only resource on such occasion was to drown thought or drive away evil spirits, was to sing psalm tunes, and the good people of Sleepy Hollow, as they sat by their doors in the evening, were often filled with awe at hearing his nasal melody, in linked sweetness long drawn out, floating from distant hill or along the dusky road. Another of his sources of fearful pleasure was to pass long winter evenings with old Dutch wives, as they sat spinning by the fire with a row of apples roasting and spluttering along the hearth, and listen to their marvelous tales of ghosts and goblins and haunted fields, and haunted brooks, and haunted bridges, and haunted houses, and particularly of the headless horseman or galloping Hessian of the Hollow. I think that's what we're going to call him, as opposed to headless horseman, just to give him a different name. As they sometimes called him, he would delight them equally by his anecdotes of witchcraft and of direful omens and portentous sights and sounds in the air, which prevailed in earlier times of Connecticut, and would frighten them woefully with the speculations upon comets and shooting stars, and with the alarming fact that the world did absolutely turn round, that they were half the time topsy-turvy. But in there was a pleasure in all this. While snugly cuddling in the chimney corner of the chamber, that was all of a ruddy glow from the crackling wood fire, and where, of course, no specter dared to show its face, it was dearly purchased by the terrors of the subsequent walk homewards. What fearful shapes and shadows beset his path amidst the dim and ghastly glare of the snowy night. With that wistful look did he eye every trembling ray of light streaming across the waste fields from some distant window. How often was he appalled by some shrub covered with snow, which like a sheeted spectre beset his very path. How often did he shrink with curdling awe at the sound of his own steps on the frosty crust beneath his feet, and dread to look over his shoulder, lest he should behold some uncouth being tramping close behind him. and how often he was thrown into complete dismay by some rushing blast howling among the trees, in the idea that it was the galloping Hessian on one of his nightly scourgings. Scourings. I'm learning to read, guys. All these, however, were mere terrors in the night, phantoms of the mind that walk in the darkness, and though he had seen many specters in his time, and been more than once beset by Satan in divers shapes? Check out that word. Tea time with Taryn. Hello, Taryn. What's this word here, guys? Just divers, huh? What is what it means? I mean, I know what divers mean, but let's try it again. Diverse? Is it just missing the E? It's just diverse. But it's not spelled diverse. It's spelled divers. All right, cool. It's an old welling of spelling diverse. Okay, cool. All these, however, were mere terrors of the night, phantoms of the mind that walk in darkness. And though he had seen many specters in his time and had been more than once beset by Satan in diverse shapes, in his lonely perambulations, yet daylight put an end to all his evils. He would have passed a pleasant life of it, in despite of the devil and all his works, if his path had not been crossed by a being that causes more perplexity to mortal man than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together. And that was a woman. Among the musical disciplines who assembled one evening in each week to receive his instructions of psalmody, there was Kathy Wapple, the daughter of the only child of a substantial Dutch farmer. She was blooming lass of a fresh 18, plump as a partridge, ripe and melting and rosy cheeks as one of her father's peaches, and universally famed not merely for her beauty, but for her vast expectations. She was withal a little of a coquette. Kathy, you a coquette? She was withal a little of a coquette, and might be perceived even in her dress, which was a mixture of ancient and modern fashions, as most suited to set off her charms. Kathy Wapple is coquettish, V. So coquettish. Oh my God. All coquettish. All the time. Yeah, you're in the story. It's right there. It says it right there. She wore ornaments, Kathy did. She wore ornaments of pure yellow gold, which were her great-great-grandmother had brought over from Sardom, the tempting stomacher of an olden time, and with a provokingly short petticoat to display the prettiest foot and ankle in the country round. Kathy Wapple. Why I never. Dear God. Foot and ankle? Dear God. Ichabod Crane. It's not what, Kathy? What excuse do you have for just brazenly flashing your ankle and foot? Ichabod Crane had a soft and foolish heart towards the sex, and it is not to be wondered that so tempting of a morsel, Kathy Wapple, that's what you are. So tempting a morsel soon found favor in his eyes, more especially after he visited her paternal mansion. Old Baltus Van Tassel was perfect picture of thriving, contented, liberal-hearted farmer. He seldom, it is true, sent either his eyes or his thoughts beyond the boundaries of his own farm. But within those, everything was snug, happy, and well-conditioned. It's like you don't know me, Kathy. They are pretty ankles and feet. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. He was satisfied with his wealth. I freely show my ankle. My goodness, the scandal. It's a scandal, I tell you. He was satisfied with his wealth, but not proud of it, and piqued himself upon the hearty abundance rather than the style in which he lived. His stronghold was situated on the banks of the Hudson, in one of those green, sheltered, fertile nooks in which the Dutch farmers are so fond of nestling. A great elm tree spread its broad branches over it, and the foot at which it bubbled up a spring of the softest and sweetest water in a little well formed of a barrel, and then stole sparkling away through the grass to a neighboring brook that babbled amongst the alders and dwarf willows. Hard by the farmhouse was a vast barn that might have served for a church, every window and crevice of which seemed to be bursting forth with treasures of the farm. The flail was busily resounding within it on the morning to night. Swallows and martins skimmed twittering about the eaves, and rows of pigeons, some with one eye turned up as if watching the weather, some with their heads under their wings or buried in their bosoms, and others swelling and cooing and bowing about their dames, were enjoying the sunshine on a roof. Sleek, unwieldy porkers were grunting in the repose and abundance of their pen, from whence sallied forth now and then troops of sucking pigs, as if to snuff the air. A stately squadron of snow geese were riding in an adjoining pond, convoying whole fleets of ducks. Regiments of turkeys were gobbling through the farmyard, and guinea fowls fretting about it, like ill-tempered housewives, with their peevish, discontented cry. Before the barn door strutted a gallant cock, that pattern of a husband, a warrior and fine gentleman, clapping his burnished wings and crowing in the pride and gladness of his heart, sometimes tearing up the earth with his feet, and then generously calling his ever hungry family of wives and children to enjoy the rich morsel which he had discovered. The pedagogue's mouth watered as he looked upon this sumptuous promise of luxurious winter fare. In his devouring mind's eye, he pictured to himself every roast pig running about with pudding in his belly and an apple in his mouth. The pigeons were snugly put to bed in a comfortable pie and tucked in with a coverlet of crust. The geese were swimming in their own gravy, and the ducks pairing cozily in the dishes, like snug married couples with a decent competency of onion sauce. In the porkers he saw carved out the future sleek side of bacon and juicy relishing ham. Not a turkey, but he beheld daintily trussed up with its gizzard under one wing, and peradventure a necklace of savory sausages, and even bright Chanticleer himself lay sprawling on his back in a side dish with uplifted claws, as if craving that quarter with his chivalrous spirit disdained to ask while living. As the enraptured Ichabod fancied all of this, as he rolled his great green eyes over the fat meadow larks, the rich fields of wheat, of rye, of buckwheat, and Indian corn, and the orchards burdened with ruddy fruit, which surrounded the warm tenement of Van Tassel, his heart yearned after the damsel who was to inherit these domains, and his imagination expanded with the idea how they might be readily turned into cash, and the money invested in immense tracts of wild land, and shingle palaces in the wilderness. Nay, this busy fancy already realized his hopes, and presented to him the blooming Cathy, with a whole family of children, mounted on the top of a wagon, loaded with a household of trumpery, with pots and kettles dangling beneath, while he beheld himself bestriding a pacing mare, with a colt at her heels, setting out for Kentucky, Tennessee, or Lord knows where. Cheers. When he entered the house, the conquest of his heart was complete. It was one of those spacious farmhouses with high-ridged but lowly sloping roofs, built in the style handed down from the Dutch settlers. The low projected eaves form a piazza along the front, capable of being closed up in bad weather. Under this were hung flails, harness, various utensils of husbandry, and nets for fishing in the neighboring river. Benches were built along the sides for summer use, and a great spinning wheel at one end and a churn at the other showed the various uses to which this important porch might be devoted. From this piazza, the wandering Ichabod entered the hall, which formed the center of the mansion, and the place of usual residence. Here rows of resplendent pewter, ranged on a long dresser, dazzled his eyes. In one corner stood a huge bag of wool, ready to be spun. In another, a quantity of linsey woolsey, just from the loom. Ears of Indian corn and strings of dried apples and peaches hung in gay festoons along the walls, mingled with the gaud of red peppers, and a door left ajar gave him a peep of the best into the best parlor, where the claw-footed chairs and dark mahogany tables shone like mirrors. And irons, with their accompanying shovel and tongs, glistened from their covert of asparagus tops. Mock oranges and conch shells decorated the mantelpiece. Strings of various colored bird eggs were suspended above it, with a great ostrich egg was hung from the center of the room, and a corner of cupboard, knowingly left open, displayed immense treasures of old silver and well-mended china. From the moment Ichabod laid his eyes upon these regions of delight, the peace of his mind was at an end. His only study was how to gain the affections of the peerless daughter of Van Tassel. In this enterprise, however, he had more real difficulties than generally fell to the lot of knight-errant of yore, who seldom had anything but giants, enchanters, fiery dragons, and such likely conquered adversaries to contend with, and had to make his way merely through the gates of iron and brass and the walls of adamant to the castle keep, where the lady of his heart was confined, all of which he achieved as easily as a man would carve his way to the center of a Christmas pie. And then the lady gave him her hand as a matter of course. Ichabod, on the contrary, had to win his way to the heart of a country coquette, beset with a labyrinth of whims and caprices, which were forever presenting new difficulties and impediments. For he had to encounter a host of fearful adversaries of real flesh and blood, and numerous rustic admirers, who beset every portal to her heart, keeping a watchful and angry eye upon each other, but ready to fly out in the common cause against any new competitor. It's not Princess Peach, Kathy Wapple, it's you, unless you are Princess Peach. If you are, we're sorry, but you're in another castle. Among the most formidable was a burly, roaring, roisterous blade by the name of Abram, or according to the Dutch abbreviation, Brahm van Brunt, the hero of the country round, which rang with his feats of strength and hardihood. He was a broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with a short, black, curly hair and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, having a mingle of air and fun and arrogance. From his Herculean frame of the great powers of limb, he received the nickname Brahm Bones. So we're going to do Brahm Bones as well. I want to highlight that. By which he was universally known. He was famed for the great knowledge and skill in horsemanship, being as dexterous on horseback as a Tartar. No idea what that means. He was foremost in all races and cockfights, with the ascendancy which bodily strength always acquires in rustic life. Was the umpire in all disputes, setting his hat on one side, giving his decisions with an air and tone that admitted of no gainsay or appeal. He was always ready for either a fight or a frolic, but had more mischief than ill will in his composition. And with all his overbearing roughness, there was a strong dash of waggish good humor at the bottom. He had 3 or 4 boon companions who regarded him as their model, and at the head of whom he scoured the country, attending every scene or feud or merriment for miles round. Is that what that means? I had no idea. In cold weather, he was distinguished by a fur cap surmounted with a flaunting fox's tail, when the folks at a country gathering decried his well-known crest at a distance, whisking about among the squad of hard riders. They always stood by for a squall. Sometimes his crew would be heard dashing along the farmhouses at midnight with whoop and halloo, like a troop of Don Cassocks. And the old dames, startling out of their sleep, would listen for a moment till the hurry-scurry and clattered by them. And they would exclaim, "Aye, there goes Brahm Bones and his gang." I get that a lot, too. Women will jump out of bed and be like, "Ah, there goes Diomedes." I often will whoop and halloo with the best of them. The neighbors looked upon him with a mixture of awe, admiration, and goodwill, and when any madcap prank or rusting brawl occurred in the vicinity, they shook their heads and warranted Brahm Bones at the bottom of it. This rantipole hero had for some time singled out the blooming Cathy for the object of his uncouth gallantries, and though his amorous toyings were something like the gentle caresses and endearments of a bear, yet it was whispered that she did not altogether discourage his hopes. You coquette, Cathy Wapple. It's a scandal. Leading on Brahm Bones like that. Who does that Cathy Wapple think she is? Certain it is, his advances were signals for rival candidates to retire. He felt no inclination to cross a lion in his armors, insomuch that when his horse was seen tied to the Van Tassel paling on a Sunday night, the sure sign of his master was courting, or as it's termed, sparking, within. All other suitors passed by in despair and carried the war into other quarters. She likes bears. Such was a formidable rival with whom Ichabod Crane had to contend, and considering all things, a stouter man than he would have shrunk from the competition, and a wiser man would have despaired. He had, however, a happy mixture of pliability and perseverance in his nature. He was in form and spirit like a supple jack, yielding but tough. Though he bent, he never broke. And though he bowed beneath the slightest pressure, yet the moment it was away, jerk! He was as erect and carried his head as high as ever. To have taken the field openly against his rival would have been madness. So supple, Cathy. So supple. Super supple. To have taken the field openly against his rival would have been madness, for he was not a man to be thwarted in his amours, any more than the stormy lover Achilles. Ichabod, therefore, made his advances in a quiet and gently insinuating manner. Under cover of his character as a singing master, he made frequent visits to the farmhouse. Not that he had anything to apprehend from the meddlesome interference of the parents, which is so often a stumbling block in the path of lovers. Balt Van Tassel was an easily indulgent soul. He loved his daughter even better than his pipe, and like a reasonable man and excellent father, let her have her way in everything. His notable little wife, too, had enough to do to attend to her housekeeping and manage her poultry. As she sagely observed, ducks and geese are foolish things and must be looked after, but girls can take care of themselves. Thus, while busy dame bustled about the house or plied the spinning wheel on one end of the piazza, honest Balt would sit smoking his evening pipe at the other, watching the achievements of a little wooden warrior who, armed with a sword in each hand, was valiantly fighting the wind on the pinnacle of the barn. In the meantime, Ichabod would carry on his suit with the daughter by the side of the spring under the great elm, or sauntering along in the twilight, that hour so favorable to the lover's eloquence. I profess not to know how women's hearts are wooed and won. To me, they've always been matters of riddle and admiration. Some seem to have been one vulnerable point or door of access, while others have 1,000 avenues and may be captured in 1,000 different ways. It is a great triumph of skill to gain the former, but a still greater proof of generalship to maintain possession of the latter, for man must battle for his fortress at every door and window. He who wins 1,000 common hearts is therefore entitled to some renown, but he who keeps undisputed sway over the heart of a coquette is indeed a hero. Certain it is that it was not the case with redoubtable Brahm Bones, and from the moment Ichabod Crane made his advances, the interest of the former evidently declined. His horse no longer seemed tied to the pawlings on Sunday nights, and with a deadly feud gradually arose between him and the preceptor of Sleepy Hollow. Brahm, who had a degree of rough chivalry about in his nature, would fain have carried matters to open warfare and have settled their pretensions to the lady, according to the mode of those concise and simple reasoners, the knights errant of yore, by single combat. But Ichabod was too conscious of the superior might of his adversary to enter the lists against him. He had overheard a boast of Bones, that he would double the schoolmaster up and lay him on the shelf of his own schoolhouse, and he was too wary to give him an opportunity. There was something provoking, extremely provoking, in his obstinately pacific system. It left Brahm no alternative but to draw upon the funds of a rustic waggery in his disposition, and to play off boorish practical jokes on his rival. Ichabod became the object of whimsical prosecution to Bones and his gang of rough riders. They harried his hitherto peaceful domains, smoked out his singing school by stopping up the chimney, broke into the schoolhouse at night, and in spite of the formidable fastenings of withy and window stakes, had turned everything topsy-turvy, so that the poor schoolmaster began to think all the witches in the county held their meetings there. But what was still more annoying is Brahm took all the opportunities of turning him into ridicule in the presence of his mistress, and had a scoundrel dog whom he taught to whine in the most ludicrous manner, and introduced as rival of Ichabod's to instruct her in psalmody. In this way, matters went on for some time, without producing any material effect on the relative situations of the contending powers. On a fine autumnal afternoon, Ichabod, in pensive mood, sat enthroned on the lofty stool from whence he usually watched the concerns of his little literary realm. In his hands he swayed a ferule, that scepter of despotic power. The birch of justice reposed on 3 nails behind the throne, a constant terror to evildoers, while on the desk before him might be seen sundry contraband articles of prohibited weapons, detected upon the persons of idle urchins, such as half-munched apples, pop guns, whirligigs, fly cages, and a whole legion of rampant little paper gamecocks. Apparently there had been some appalling act of justice recently inflicted, for his scholars were all busily intent upon their books, or slyly whispering behind them, with one eye kept upon the master. And a kind of buzzing stillness reigned throughout the schoolroom. Now, before we go further, we're going to do I'm going to do the language command, because we're about to use a little bit of old school language, and I want to make sure everybody understands that we're held under toss, and I do change language if I need to. And this is historical works of literature, so I'm reading the literature as it were. Unless they violate toss, then I will supplement them with appropriate synonyms. It was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a Negro in a tow-cloth jacket and trousers, and round-crowned fragment of a hat, like the cap of Mercury, and mounted on the back of a ragged, wild, half-broken colt, which he managed with a rope by way of halter. He came clattering up to the school door with an invitation to Ichabod to attend merrymaking or quilting frolic, to be held, I know, Taryn, it's terrible, to be held that evening in Maynard Van Tassel's. And having delivered his message with that air of importance and effort at fine language which a Negro is apt to display on petty embassies of the kind, he dashed over the brook and was seen scampering away up the hollow, full of the importance and hurry of his mission. All was now bustle and hubbub in the late quiet schoolroom. The scholars were hurried through their lessons without stopping at trifles. Those who were nimble skipped over half with impunity, and those who were tardy had a smart application now and then in the rear to quicken their speed or help them over a tall word. Books were flung aside without being put away on the shelves. Inkstands were overturned, benches thrown down, and the whole school was turned loose an hour before the usual time, bursting forth like a legion of young imps, yelping and racketing about the green in joy at their early emancipation. The gallant Ichabod now spent at least an extra half an hour at his toilet, brushing and furbishing up his best, and indeed only a suit of rusty black, and arranged his Okay, let's back up there. The gallant Ichabod now spent at least an extra half hour at his toilet, burnishing and furbishing up his best, and indeed only suit of rusty black, and arranged his locks by a bit of broken looking glass that hung up in the schoolhouse, that he might make his appearance before his mistress in the true style of a cavalier. He borrowed a horse from the farmer with whom he was domiciled, a choleric old Dutchman by the name of Hans von Ripper. That's a freaking awesome name. Hans von Ripper. We need an NPC with that name. Hans von Ripper. And thus, gallantly mounted, issued forth like a knight-errant in quest of his adventures. But it is meet I should, in the true spirit of romantic story, give some account of the looks and equipment of my hero and his steed. The animal he bestrode was a broken-down plow horse that had outlived almost everything but its viciousness. He was gaunt and shagged, with a ewe-neck, and a head like a hammer. His rusty mane and tail were tangled and knotted with burrs. One eye had lost its pupil and was glaring and spectral, but the other had the gleam of a genuine devil in it. Still, he must have had fire and metal in his day, if we may judge from the name he bore of Gunpowder. That's right, so we need to make Von Ripper have gunpowder as his horse. He had in fact been a favorite steed of his master's, the choleric Von Ripper, who was a furious rider, and had infused very probably some of his own spirit in the animal. For the old, broken down as he looked, there was a more of the lurking devil in him than any young filly in the country. Ichabod was a suitable figure for such a steed. He strode with short stirrups, and brought his knees nearly up to the pommel of his saddle. His sharp elbows stuck out like grasshoppers. He carried his whip perpendicularly in his hand like a scepter, and his horse jogged on, the motion of his arms not unlike the flapping of a pair of wings. A small wool hat rested on the top of his nose, for his scanty strip of forehead might be called, and the skirts of his black coat fluttered out almost to the horse's tails. Such was the appearance of Ichabod and his steed as they shambled out of the gate of Hans von Ripper, and was altogether such an apparition as is seldom to be met in broad daylight. It was, as I have said, a fine autumnal day. The sky was clear and serene, and nature wore that rich and golden livery which we always associate with the idea of abundance. The forest had put on their sober brown and yellow, while some trees of the tenderer kind had been nipped by the frost in the brilliant dyes of orange, purple, and scarlet. Streaming files of wild ducks began to make their appearance high in the air. The bark of a squirrel might be heard from the groves of beech and hickory nuts, and the pensive whistle of the quail at intervals from the neighboring stubble fields. The small birds were taking their farewell banquets. In the fullness of their reveille, they fluttered, chirping and frolicking from bush to bush and tree to tree, capricious from the very profusion of variety around them. There was an honest cock robin, the favorite game of stripling sportsmen, with its loud, querulous note, and the twittering blackbirds flying in the sable clouds, and a golden-winged woodpecker with his crimson crest, his broad black gorget with splendid plumage, and a cedar bird with his red-tipped wings and yellow-tipped tail, and a little Montero cap of feathers, and a blue jay with that noisy coxcomb in his gay light blue coat and white underclothes, screaming and chattering and nodding and bobbing and bowing and pretending to be on good terms with every songster of the grove, and the bork of nickel yelling at the squirrels. could be heard over all of them. As Ichabod jogged slowly on his way, his eyes ever open to every symptom of culinary abundance, ranged with delight over the treasures of jolly autumn. On all sides he beheld vast stores of apples, some hanging in oppressive opulence on the trees, some gathered into baskets and barrels for the market, others heaped up in rich piles for the cider press. Cider press! Cheers. Farther on, he beheld great fields of Indian corn, with its golden ears peeping from their leafy coverts, and holding out the promise of cakes and hasty pudding and yellow pumpkins lying beneath them, turning up their fair and round bellies to the sun, and giving ample prospect to the most luxurious of pies. And anon he passed the fragrant buckwheat fields, breathing the odor of the beehive. And as he beheld them, soft anticipation stole over his mind of dainty flapjacks, well buttered and garnished with honey or treacle by the delicate little dimpled hand of Kathy Wapple. Thus, feeding his mind with many sweet thoughts and sugared suppositions, he journeyed along the sides of the range of hills which look out upon some of the most goodliest scenes of the mighty Hudson. The sun gradually wheeled its broad disk to the west, broad whisk down in the west. The wide bosom of the Tappan Zee lay motionless and glassy, excepting that here and there a gentle undulation waved and prolonged the blue shadow of the distant mountain. A few amber clouds floated in the sky, without a breath of air to move them. The horizon was of a fine golden tint, changing gradually to a pure apple green, and from that into a deep blue of mid-heaven. A slanting ray lingered on the woody crests of the precipices and overhung some parts of the river, giving greater depth to the dark and purple of their rocky sides. A sloop was loitering in the distance, dropping slowly down with the tide, her sail hanging uselessly against the mast. And as the reflection of the sky gleamed along the still water, it seemed as if the vessel was suspended in air. It was toward evening that Ichabod arrived at the castle of Herr Van Tassel, which he found thronged with the pride and flower of adjacent old farmers, spare leathern-faced race, in homespun coats and breeches, blue stockings and huge shoes, and magnificent pewter buckles, their brisk, withered little dames in close-crimped caps, long-waisted short gowns, and homespun petticoats with scissors and pincushions and a gay calico pockets hanging on the outside. Buxom lasses, almost as antiquated as their mothers, excepting where a straw hat, a fine ribbon, or perhaps a white frock gave symptoms of city innovation. Their sons, in short square-skirted coats with rows of stupendous brass buttons, and their hair generally queued in the fashion of the times, especially if they could procure an eel skin for the purpose, it being esteemed throughout the country as a potent nourisher and strengthener of the hair. Eel skin strengthens the hair. I should just slather eel skins on top of my pate. Yes, that's what I should do. Brahm Bones, however, was a hero of this scene, having come to the gathering on his steed Daredevil. Brahm Bones has a horse, and his horse is named Daredevil. A creature like himself was full of mettle and mischief, in which no one but himself could manage. He was in fact noted for preferring vicious animals, given to all kinds of tricks, which kept the rider in constant risk of his neck, for he held a tractable, well-broken horse as unworthy of a lad of spirit. No, I could grow a big afro if I had eel skins, V. A huge plumage. My flowing locks would be. Fain would I pause to dwell upon the world of charms and burst upon the enraptured gaze of my hero as he entered the state parlor of Van Tassel's mansion. No, V, you're not very nice. Fain would I pause to dwell upon the whole world of charms that burst upon the enraptured gaze of my hero as he entered the state parlor of Van Tassel's mansion. Huge plumage, exactly, Kathy Wapple. Not those of the bevy of buxom lasses with their luxurious display of red and white, but the ample charms of the genuine Dutch country tea table in the sumptuous time of autumn. Such heaped up with platters of cakes of various and almost indescribable kinds known to the experienced Dutch housewives. There was the dowdy donut, a tender, oily cake, and the crisp and crumbling cruller, sweet cakes and short cakes, ginger cakes and honey cakes, the whole family of cakes. And there was apple pies and peach pies and pumpkin pies, besides slices of ham and smoked beef, and moreover delectable dishes of preserved plums and peaches and pears and quinces, not to mention broiled shad and roasted chickens, together with bowls of milk and cream, and mingled higgledy-piggledy, pretty much as I had ever enumerated them, with the motherly teapot sending up its clouds of vapor from the mist. Heaven bless the mark! I want breath and time to discuss this banquet as it deserves, and am too eager to get on with my story. Happily, Ichabod Crane was not in such a great hurry as his historian, but did ample justice to every dainty. He was kind and thankful creature, whose heart dilated in proportion as his skin was filled with good cheer. I think it's dilated. Whose heart was filled with good cheer, and whose spirits rose with eating, and some men do with their drink. He could not help, too, rolling his large eyes around him as he ate, and chuckling with the possibility that he might one day be the lord of this scene, an almost unimaginable luxury and splendor. Then he thought how soon he'd turn his back on the old schoolhouse. Thank you, V. I see it coming. Then he thought how soon he'd turn on his back on the old schoolhouse. He'd snap his fingers in the face of Hans von Ripper and every other cheap patron, miserly patron, and kick an itinerant pedagogue out the door that he should dare to call him comrade. That's how you spell dilate? Jeez. It's almost like I don't have college degrees. Old Baltus Van Tassel moved about amongst his guests with a face dilated with content and good humor, round and jolly as a harvest moon. His hospitable attentions were brief but expressive, being confined to the shake of the hand and a slap on the shoulder and a loud laugh and a pressing invitation to fall to and help themselves. And now the sound of music from the common room or hall summoned to the dance. The musician was an old gray-haired Negro, again with the language, who he had been the itinerant orchestra of the neighborhood for more than half a century. His instrument was old and battered as himself. The greater part of the time he scraped on with 2 or 3 strings, accompanying every movement of the bow with a motion of his head, bowing almost to the ground and and stamping with his foot whenever a fresh couple were to start. Ichabod prided himself on his dancing just as much as his vocal powers. Not a limb, not a fiber about him was idle. And to have seen his loosely hung frame in full motion and clattered about the room, you could have thought St. Vitus himself, that blessed patron of the dance, was figuring before you in person. He was the admiration of all the Negroes, who, having gathered of all ages and sizes from the farm and of the neighborhood, stood forming a pyramid of shining black faces at every door and window, gazing with delight at the scene, rolling their white eyeballs and showing grinning rows of ivory from ear to ear. How could the flogger of urchins be otherwise than animated and joyous? The lady of his heart was a partner in the dance, and smiling graciously in reply and amorous oglings, while Brahm Bones, sorely smitten with love and jealousy, sat brooding by himself at one corner. When the dance was at an end, Ichabod was attracted to the knot of Sager folks, who, with old Van Tassel, sat smoking at one end of the piazza, gossiping over former times and drawing out long stories of the war. This neighborhood, at the time at which I'm speaking, was one of those highly favored places, which around with the Chronicle and great men, the British and American line had run near it during the war. It had, therefore, been the scene of marauding and infested with refugees, cowboys, and all kinds of border chivalry. Just sufficient time had elapsed to enable each storyteller to dress up his tale with a little becoming fiction, and the distinctness of his recollection to make himself the hero of every exploit. There was the story of Doff Martling, a large blue-bearded Dutchman who had nearly taken a British frigate with an old iron 9-pounder from a mud breastwork. Only his gun burst at the sixth discharge. And there was an old gentleman who shall be nameless, being too rich a miner to be lightly mentioned, who in the Battle of White Plains, being an excellent master of defense, parried a musket ball with a small sword, insomuch that he absolutely felt it whiz round the blade and glance off the hilt, in proof of which he was ready at any time to show the sword, with the hilt a little bent. There were several more that had been equally great in the field, not one of whom but was persuaded that he had considerable hand in bringing the war to a happy termination. I am out of drinks. So, I am going to take a break right now because I am out of drinks. Menner. Oh, yeah. Okay. I know that word. I'm going to take a small break. Dehydrate and rehydrate. Everybody else, it means sir. Thank you. Take a break yourselves. Med check. Hydrate check. Dehydrate check. Stand up and stretch if you need to. And I'll be back in just like 5 minutes. Just give me a minute. I was muted the whole time. We're back. Sorry, I was muted. I hope you are back too. Back with your drinks. I cheers you again. Cheers, ears. A refill on the cider is tasty this evening. Cheers. Cheers, Taryn. What are you drinking tonight, Taryn? Let us hope for wine this evening. A woman of your stature needs a little wine to go with those pathetic little bagel bite things you had as snacks. Those aren't snacks. Woman. Let's get back into it. This is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. If you are just joining us, Ichabod Crane has made his way to the apple of his eye's house, Katrina, or as we're calling her tonight, Kathy Wapple, and has gone to the party and eaten himself crazy and gotten his swerve on the dance floor. And now he has retired onto the veranda, onto the porch, and is talking to the scholarly types. But all these were nothing to the tales of ghosts and apparitions that succeeded. The neighborhood is rich with legendary tales of the kind. Local tales of superstitions thrive best in these sheltered, long-settled retreats, but are trampled underfoot by the shifting throng and the forms of population of most of our country places. Besides, there is no encouragement for ghosts in most of our villages, for they have scarcely had time to finish their first nap and turn themselves in their grave before their surviving friends have traveled away from the neighborhood, so that when they turn out at night and walk their rounds, they have no acquaintance left to call upon. There is perhaps the reason why we seldom hear of ghosts except in our long-established Dutch communities. The immediate cause, however, of the prevalence of supernatural stories in these parts was doubtless owing to the vicinity of Sleepy Hollow. There was a contagion in the air that blew from the haunted region. It breathed forth an atmosphere of dreams and fancies, infecting all the land. Several of the Sleepy Hollow people were present at Van Tassel's, and as usual were doling out the wild and wonderful legends. Many dismal tales were told about the funeral trains, about mourning cries and wailings heard and seen about the great tree, where the unfortunate Major Andre was taken, and which stood in the neighborhood. Some mention was made also of the woman in white. See, I want to do this one too. I think this would be an awesome tale to write a little thing about. The chief part in these stories, however, turned upon the favorite specter of Sleepy Hollow, the headless horseman, who had been heard several times of late patrolling the country, and, it was said, tethered his horse nightly amongst the graves in the churchyard. The sequestered situation of the church seemed always to have made it a favorite haunt of troubled spirits. It stands on a knoll surrounded by locust trees and lofty elms, from which its decent whitewashed walls shine modestly forth like a Christian purity beaming through the shades of retirement. A gentle slope descends from it to a silver sheet of water bordered by high trees, between which peeps may be caught of the blue hills of the Hudson. To look upon its grass-grown yard where there are sunbeams seems to sleep so quietly, one would think that there would at least the dead might rest in peace. That there, at least, the dead might rest in peace. On one side of the church extends a wide, woody dell, along which raves a large brook amongst the broken rocks and trunks of fallen trees. Over a deep black part of the stream, not far from the church, was formerly thrown a wooden bridge, the road that led to it, and the bridge itself were thickly shaded by overhanging trees, which cast a gloom about it, even in the daytime, but occasioned a fearful darkness at night. Such was one of the favorite haunts of the headless horseman, and the place that he was most frequently encountered. The tale was told of old Brower, a most hysterical believer in ghosts, and how he met the horseman returning from his foray into Sleepy Hollow, and was obliged to get up behind him, how they galloped over bush and brake, over hill and swamp, until they reached the bridge, where the horseman suddenly turned into a skeleton, threw old Brower into the brook and sprang away over the treetops with a clap of thunder. Okay, we got to keep that one here. The story was immediately matched by a thrice marvelous adventure of Brahm Bones, who made light of the galloping Hessian as an errant jockey. He affirmed that on returning one night from a neighboring village of Sing Sing, he had been overtaken by this midnight trooper, and he had offered to race him with him for a bowl of punch, and he should have won it too, for the daredevil beat this goblin horse and all hollow. But just as they came to the church bridge, the Hessian bolted and vanished in a flash of fire. All these tales, told in drowsy undertone, with which men talk in the dark, and countenances of the listeners only now and then receiving a casual gleam from the glare of a pipe, sank deep in the mind of Ichabod. He repaid them in kind with large extracts from his invaluable author, Cotton Mather, and added many marvelous events that had taken place in his native state of Connecticut, and fearful sights which he had seen in his nightly walks about Sleepy Hollow. The revel now gradually broke up, and the old farmers gathered together their families and wagons and were heard for some time rattling along the hollow roads and over distant hills. Big Jim Slade of Big Jim Slade Gaming. What's going on? I want to warn you, Big Jim. Taryn's here. You know how she gets. The revel had now gradually broken up. The old farmers gathered along their families and wagons and were heard for some time rattling along the hollow roads and over distant hills. Some of the damsels mounted on pillions behind their favorite swains, and their light-hearted laughter, mingling with the clatter of hooves, echoed along the silent woodlands, sounding fainter and fainter until they gradually died away, and the late scene of noise and frolic was all silent and deserted. Ichabod only lingered behind, according to the custom of country lovers, to have a tete-a-tete with the heiress, fully convinced that he was now on the high road to success. I bought the streamers. Terrence here. It's a party. So Ichabod was hopeful that he should gain the hand of the coquette Kathy Wapple. Let us see how it goes. Because we know how Kathy Wapple can be, flashing foot and ankle. Dear God. Let's see how Ichabod gets on. What passed at this interview I will not pretend to say, for in fact I do not know. Something, however, I fear must have gone wrong, for he was certainly sallied forth after no great interval with an air quite desolate and chapfallen. Oh, these women. Could that girl have been playing off any of her coquettish tricks? Kathy, were you playing off any of your coquettish tricks? Was her engagement of the poor pedagogue a mere sham to secure her conquest of his rival? Kathy Wapple, how you toy with Ichabod's heartstrings. Heaven only knows, not I. Let it suffice to say, Ichabod stole forth with an air of one who had been sacking in a hen roost rather than a fair lady's heart. Without looking to the right or the left to notice the scene of rural wealth, on which he had so often gloated, he went straight to the stable, and with several hearty cuffs and kicks roused his steed, most uncourteously from the comfortable quarters which he was soundly sleeping, dreaming of mountains of corn and oats and the whole valleys of timothy and clover. It was the very witching time of night that Ichabod, heavy-hearted and crestfallen, pursued his travels homewards, along the sides and lofty hills which arise above Tarrytown, in which he had traversed so cheerily in the afternoon. You know, I believe what happens here to forth, Kathy Wapple, is your responsibility, because you are a tart. Yeah, I said it. A coquettish tart. It was the very witching hour. Oh, I already read that part. Far below him, the Tappan Zee spread its dusky and indistinct waste of waters, and here and there the tall mast of a sloop riding quietly at anchor under the land. In the dead hush of night, he could even hear the barking of a watchdog from the opposite shore of the Hudson. But it was, you're fine with that, but it was so vague and faint as only to give an idea of his distance from his faithful companion of man. Now and then, too, the long-drawn crowing of a cock, accidentally awakened, would sound far, far off from some farmhouse away among the hills. But it was like a dreaming sound in his ear. No signs of life occurred near him, but occasionally a melancholy chirp of a cricket, or perhaps the guttural twang of a bullfrog from a neighboring marsh, as if sleepily uncomfortably turned suddenly in his bed. All the stories of ghosts and goblins that he heard in the afternoon now came crowding upon his recollection. The night grew darker and darker. The stars seemed to sink deeper in the sky, and driving clouds occasionally hid them from his sight. He had never felt so lonely and dismal. He was, moreover, approaching the very place where many of the scenes of ghost stories had been laid. In the center of the road stood an enormous tulip tree, which towered like a giant above all the other trees in the neighborhood, and formed a kind of landmark. Its limbs were gnarled and fantastic, large enough to form trunks for ordinary trees, twisting down almost to the earth and rising again into the air. It was connected with a tragical story of the unfortunate Andre, who had been taken prisoner hard by, and was universally known by the name of Major Andre's tree. The common people regarded it with a mixture of respect and superstition, partly out of sympathy for the ill-starred namesake, and partly from the tales of strange sights and doleful lamentations told concerning it. As Ichabod approached this fearful tree, he began to whistle. He thought his whistle was answered, but it was a blast sweeping sharply through the dry branches. As he approached a little nearer, he thought he saw something white hanging in the midst of the trees. He paused and ceased whistling, but now, on looking more narrowly, perceived that it was a place where the tree had been scathed by lightning, and the white wood laid bare. Suddenly, he heard a groan. His teeth chattered, and his knees smote against the saddle. It was but the rubbing of one huge tree upon another, as they swayed about him in the breeze. He passed the tree in safety, but new perils lay before him. About 200 yards from the tree, a small brook crossed the road and ran into the marshy and thickly wooded glen, known by the name of Wiley's Swamp. A few rough logs laid side by side served for a bridge over this stream. On that side of the road where the brook entered the wood, a group of oaks and chestnuts, matted thick with wild grapevines, threw a cavernous gloom over it. To pass this bridge was the severest trial. It was at this identical spot that the unfortunate Andre was captured, and under the covert of those chestnuts and vines where the stubby yeomen were concealed who surprised him. This has ever been considered a haunted stream, and fearful are the feelings of a schoolboy who has to pass it alone after dark. As he approached the stream, his heart began to thump. He summoned up, however, all his resolution and gave his horse half a score of kicks in the ribs and attempted to dash briskly across the bridge. But instead of starting forward, the perverse old animal made a lateral movement and ran broadside against the fence. Ichabod, whose fears increased with the delay, jerked the reins to the other side and lustily kicked with the contrary foot. It was all in vain. His steed started, it was true, but it was only to plunge to the opposite side of the road into the thicket of brambles and alder bushes. The schoolmaster now bestowed both whip and heel upon the starveling ribs of the old gunpowder, who dashed forward, snuffling and snorting, but came to a stand just by the bridge, with a suddenness that nearly sent his rider sprawling over his head. Just at this moment, a plashy tramp by the side of the bridge caught the sensitive ear of Ichabod. In the dark shadow of the grove, on the margin of the brook, he beheld something huge, misshapen, and towering. It stirred not, but seemingly gathered up in the gloom, like some gigantic monster ready to spring upon the traveler. The hair of the affrighted pedagogue rose upon his hair with terror. What was to be done? To turn and fly was now too late. Besides, what chance was there of escaping a ghost or goblin, if it was such, which could ride upon the wings of the wind? Summoning up, therefore, a show of courage, he demanded in stammering accents, Who are you? He received no reply. He repeated his demand in a still more agitated voice. Still, there was no answer. Once more he cudgeled the sides of the inflexible gunpowder, and shutting his eyes, broke forth with involuntary fervor into a psalm tune. Just then the shadowy object of alarm put itself in motion, and with a scramble and bound stood at once in the middle of the road. Though the night was dark and dismal, yet the form of the unknown might now in some degrees be ascertained. He appeared to be the horseman of large dimensions, and mounted upon a black horse of powerful frame. He gave no offer of molestation or sociability, but kept aloof on one side of the road, jogging along blind side of old Gunpowder, who had now gotten over his fright and waywardness. Ichabod, who had no relish for his strange midnight companion, and bethought himself of the adventure of Brahm Bones with the galloping Hessian, now quickened his steeds in hope of leaving it behind. The stranger, however, quickened his horse to an equal pace. Ichabod pulled up and fell into a walk, thinking to lag behind. The other did the same. His heart began to sink with him. He endeavored to resume his psalm tune, but his parched tongue clove to the roof of his mouth. He could not utter a stave. There was something in the moody, dogged silence in this pertinacious companion that was mysterious and appalling. It was soon fearfully accounted for. On mounting a rising ground, which brought the figure of the fellow traveler in relief against the sky, gigantic in height and muffled in his cloak, Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. But his horror was still more increased on observing that the head, which should have rested upon his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of his saddle. His terror rose to desperation, and he rained a shower of kicks and blows on Gunpowder, hoping to, by sudden movement, to give his companion the slip. But the specter started full jump with him. Away, then, they dashed through the thick and thin, stones flying and sparks flashing at every bound. Ichabod's flimsy garments fluttered in the air as he stretched his long, lanky body over his horse's head in the eagerness of his flight. They now had reached the road which turns off to Sleepy Hollow, but Gunpowder, who seemed possessed with a demon, instead of keeping it up, made an opposite turn and plunged headlong down the hill to the left. This road leads through a sandy hollow, shaded by trees for about a quarter of a mile, where it crosses a bridge famous in goblin story, and just beyond the swells of a green knoll which stands the whitewashed church. As yet the panic of the steed had given his unskillful rider an apparent advantage in the chase, but just as he got halfway through the hollow, the girths of the saddle gave way, and he felt it slipping from underneath him. He seized it by the pommel and endeavored to hold it firm, but in vain, and had just in time to save himself by clasping Gunpowder around the neck when the saddle fell to the earth and he heard it trampled underfoot by his pursuer. For a moment the terror of Hans von Ripper's wrath passed across his mind, for it was his Sunday saddle, but there was no time for petty fears. The goblin was hard on his haunches, and, unskillful rider that he was, he had much ado to maintain his seat, sometimes slipping on one side, sometimes the other, and sometimes jolted on the high ridge of the horse's backbone, with a violence he verily feared would cleave him asunder. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hopes that the church bridge was at hand. The wavering reflection of a silver star at the bosom of the brook told him that he was not mistaken. He saw the walls of the church dimly glaring in the trees beyond. He recollected the place where Brahm Bones' ghostly competitor had disappeared. If I can but reach that bridge, thought Ichabod, I am safe. Just then he heard the black steed's panting, blowing close behind him. He even fancied that he felt his hot breath. Another convulsive kick in the ribs, and old Gunpowder sprang upon the bridge. He thundered over the resounding planks. He gained the opposite side, and now Ichabod cast a look behind to see if his pursuer would vanish, according to rule, in a flash of fire and brimstone. Just then he saw the goblin rise up in his stirrups, in the very act of hurling his head at him. Ichabod endeavored to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. It encountered his cranium with a tremendous crash, and he tumbled headlong into the dust, and Gunpowder, the black steed, and the goblin rider passed by him in a whirlwind. The next morning, the old horse was found without his saddle, and with the bridle under his feet, soberly cropping the grass at his master's gate. Ichabod did not make his appearance at breakfast. Dinner hour came, but no Ichabod. The boys assembled at the schoolhouse and strolled idly about the banks of the brook, but no schoolmaster. Hans von Ripper now began to feel some uneasiness about the fate of poor Ichabod and his saddle. An inquiry was set on foot, and after a diligent investigation they came upon his traces. In one part of the road leading to the church was found the saddle trampled in the dirt, the tracks of the horse's hoofs deeply dented in the road, and evidently at furious speed were traced to the bridge, beyond which on the bank of the part of the brook where the water ran deep and black was found the hat of an unfortunate Ichabod, and close beside it a shattered pumpkin. The brook was searched, but the body of the schoolmaster was not to be discovered. Hans von Ripper, as executor of his estate, examined the bundle of which had contained all his worldly effects. They consisted of 2 shirts, an old pair of corduroy small clothes, a rusty razor, a book of psalm tunes filled with dog ears, a broken pitch pipe. As to the books and furniture of the schoolhouse, they belonged to the community, excepting Cotton Mather's History of Witchcraft and a New England Almanac, a book of dreams and fortune-telling, in which last was a sheet of foolscap, much scribbled on and blotted in several fruitless attempts to make copy of the verses in honor of the heiress of Van Tassel. These magic books and their poetic scrawl were forthwith consigned to the flames by Hans von Ripper, who, from that time forward, determined to send his children no more to school, observing that he never knew any good to come of this same reading and writing. Whatever money the schoolmaster had possessed, and he had received his quarter's pay but a day or 2 before, he must have had upon his person at the time of his disappearance. The mysterious events caused much speculation at the church. On the following Sunday, knots of gazers and gossips were collected in this churchyard and at the bridge, and at the spot where the hat and the pumpkin had been found. The stories of Brower, of Bones, and a whole budget of others were called to mind when they had diligently considered them all and compared them with the symptoms of the present case. They shook their heads and came to the conclusion that Ichabod had been carried off by the galloping Hessian. As he was a bachelor and in nobody's debt, nobody troubled his head any more about him. The school was removed to a different quarter of the hollow, and another pedagogue reigned in his stead. It is true, an old farmer who had been down to New York on a visit several years after, had from whom this account of the ghostly adventure was received, brought home the intelligence that Ichabod Crane was still alive, that he had left the neighborhood partly through the fear of the goblin and Hans von Ripper, and partly in mortification at having been suddenly dismissed by the heiress, that he had changed his quarters to a distant part of the country, had kept school and studied law at the same time, had been admitted to the bar, turned politician, electioneered, written for the newspapers, and finally who had been made a justice of the 10-pound court. Brahm Bones, too, was shortly after his rival's disappearance conducting the blooming Katrina in triumph to the altar, who was observed to look exceedingly knowing whenever the story of Ichabod was related, and always burst into a hearty laugh at the mention of the pumpkin, which led some to suspect that he knew more about the matter than he chose to tell. Old country wives, however, who were the best judges of these matters, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by supernatural means. And it is a favorite story, often told about the neighborhood round the winter and evening fire. The bridge became more than ever an object of superstitious awe, and that may be the reason why the road has been altered of years late, so as to approach the church by border of the mill pond. The schoolhouse, being deserted, soon fell into decay, and was reported to be haunted by the ghost of the unfortunate pedagogue, and the plowboy, loitering homeward of a still summer evening, has often fancied his voice at a distance chanting a melancholy psalm among the tranquil solitudes of Sleepy Hollow. Postscript, found in the handwriting of Mr. Knickerbocker. The preceding tale is given almost the precise words in which I heard it related at the corporation meeting in the ancient of Manhattoes, in which many were present of its sagest and most illustrious burghers. The narrator was a pleasant, shabby gentleman of an old fellow in pepper and salt clothes, with a sadly humorous face, and one whom I strongly suspect of being poor. He made such efforts to be entertaining. When his story was concluded, there was much laughter and approbation, particularly from the 2 or 3 deputy aldermen, who had been asleep the greater part of the time. There was, however, one tall, dry-looking old gentleman, with beetling eyebrows, who maintained a grave, rather severe face throughout, now and then folding his arms, inclining his head, and looking down upon the floor, as if turning a doubt over in his mind. He was one of your wary men, who never laugh but upon good grounds, when they have reason and law on their side. When the mirth of the rest of the company had subsided, and silence was restored, he leaned one arm on the elbow of his chair, and sticking the other akimbo, demanded with a slight but exceedingly sage motion of his head and contraction of his brow, what was the moral of the story, and what was it to prove? The storyteller, who was just putting a glass of wine to his lips as a refreshment after his toils, paused for a moment, looking at his inquirer with an air of infinite deference, and lowering the glass slowly to the table, observed that the story intended most logically to prove that there is no situation in life that has advantages and pleasures, provided we will but take a joke as we find it. That therefore he that runs races with goblin troopers is likely to have a rough riding of it. Ergo, for a country schoolmaster to be refused the hand of a Dutch heiress is a certain step to high preferment in the state. The cautious old gentleman knit his brows tenfold after this explanation, being sorely puzzled by the ratiocination of the syllogism, while, methought, the one in pepper and salt eyed him with a something of a triumphant leer. At length he observed that this was all very well, but he still thought the story was a little on the extravagant, that there were 1 or 2 points which he still had doubts. "Faith, sir," replied the storyteller, "as to that matter, I don't believe one half of it myself." Dietrich Knickerbocker. The end. So there it is. I think when I listened to this, the postscript was not there. I don't think it was there. What did y'all think? I'm sure we had all seen The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. What did you think about the writing of it? Let us move to some different lo-fi. Change our music. Seemed pretty good to me. Washington Irving, I suppose. I don't remember that postscript either. It's a good example of a story. Thanks, V. We're We're going to change this over from just chatting to Dungeons and Dragons. I think we will work on one, as we're 2 hours in now. Let's work on one of these. Let's work on an NPC. Let's work on Brahm Bones tonight. And then we'll come back next week and we'll work on the Headless Horseman and Ichabod Crane to add to our NPCs and things. Have a good night, Tea Time with Taryn. I will probably see you. I think you're streaming tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. Sleep well. Let's go back to the reading scene. Then I can... go back here. Okay. So we're going to change this now to Brahm Bones. Is that how they spelled it? I'll be jumping back and forth a lot. Hey, Ezekiel, you made it. Brahm Bones. Let's see if we can find the description of Brahm Bones. And we can build him up into a nice NPC. There we go. I spelled it wrong. Brahm von Brunt. I kind of like that it vexes you so, Kathy. So I'll probably leave it there. Do not vex. I'm not vexing Kathy. How did we spell that name? Streamlabs creeps you. Brunt. Okay. What do we think about Brahm Bones here? Is he good? Is he neutral? Is he evil? What alignment do we think of good Brahm Bones? His Brahminess. I can go with chaotic neutral. I'm good with that. Okay. All right. Now we've got a description of him. Brahm is neutral. I like chaotic neutral. He seemed to be a rough rider. Brahm von Brunt, the hero of country round, which ranged with his feats of strength and hardihood. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, was strong, with short curly black hair and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, having a a mingled air of fun and arrogance. From his Herculean frame was a great power of limb. He received the nickname Brahm Bones, by which he was universally known. He was famed for his knowledge and skill of horsemanship, being as dexterous on horseback as a Tartar. I think we want to add... I'm not sure how to do this, but I'm going to try. We're going to try to insert, not a table. I don't like that either. Maybe a note. Aha! I like it. All right. Let's pull from our work here. Let us do as my students do and copy and paste. What could go wrong? I don't like that, what just happened. That's not good. Ah, I see. I see. I'm learning. Ha ha! Brahm Bones is broad-shouldered and double-jointed. What did they mean by double-jointed back then? What do you think that means? Also, we need to give him some dress. We need to dress this man. His arms move in weird ways. He got his wiggle waggle. His jiggle juggle. He's flexible. Okay. We're also going to assume, we want to build him up as something that you would bump into. Oh, it helps me if I go to the right screen here. Something that you would bump into on the street in whatever town we're building. We haven't named any of this stuff yet. So, Brahm Bones is broad-shouldered and flexible, with short black curly hair and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, having a mingled air of fun and arrogance. You know what else I want to put down here? I want to put down here that we wrote this so that if someone takes it down the road, they know. So okay. We've got that then. How tall should Brahm Bones be? How much should he weigh? Should he be able to fight? Should we give him I don't think he did sell horses. They don't say what Brahm Bones does. Or they didn't say it tonight. He was just there. Everybody loved him. So we had to give him a job. We had to make how big he's going to be here. 6'5"? All right, cool. Oh, he can handle horses. Yes, 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 yes. An intimidating figure. What would he wear? What would Brahm Bones be seen wearing on any day-to-day basis? What do you think makes sense for Brahm Bones? He's not actually Bones. They just call him that. No, they're probably like 18 or 19. You're right. Something leather, huh? We have to adopt him to sort of our medieval times here, or our Dungeons and Dragons times. Should he be wearing armor? Would Brahm be wearing armor? Would he be carrying a sword? Would he know how to use a sword? Yeah, he'd be wearing armor. Okay. All right, so we're going to assume something like leather armor. Okay. Studded leather armor? Cool. I'm good with that. Ay, 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 ay. He's a rogue. I like that. How high should we put his strength? Should he have an 18 strength? Should it be that high? That's a big rogue. Yeah, we're not thinking of like thief in this case, but more like swashbuckling type. Roguish type rather than thiefy type, I think. How high should his strength be? Should we do 17, 18? How strong should Brahm Bones be? Maybe 17? Which would be a plus 3? 18? What does that give him? An 18? Is that a plus 3? High strength? His dex was seen as pretty high too. So let's do 17 dex. We want to change this from humanoid to human. Was that a plus 3 strength? Plus. If it's a 17, is it a plus 2? His constitution should be pretty high. We'll do a 17 con. We know that's plus 3. 18 being a plus 4? Int, not so high. Wisdom, not so high. So like an 8 intelligence. Which I think is a 0. 7 wisdom. What about charisma? He wasn't known for being like super charismatic. Yeah, he's not as bright as he could be. What do we think his charisma should be? Here, good old Brahm Bones. He should have a little charisma. Yeah, everybody would like him. That's fair. So something like 14. A plus 2. 11. Plus 1. 12? Still +1, I think. Commission immunities, none. Senses, what is his passive perception? How do we calculate passive perception? +10 all modifiers. And a perception would be intelligence? No, wisdom.
Yeah. That's on a bomb, yo.
So 10, 0. Passive perception is 10. Languages, common. Challenge rating, we don't know yet. Okay. What skills should we give Brahm Bones? Wisdom base. Yeah. Oh, which is a -1. Ew. It's a 9 then. That's his passive perception. Ew. Horse riding. Agreed. Horse riding. Brahm Bones is a skilled horse rider. Horseman. Horseman? Good night, Kathy Wapple. Everybody say good night to Kathy Wapple. No problem, Kathy. Good night. All right, we gave him the ability of Rough Rider. Brahm Bones is a skilled horseman and has advantage on any skill checks while on horseback. Oh, you know what we should do? He said he was always had like people around him all the time, right? So what do they call him? His group of people, anything? Just call him Brahm Bones and his gang. Okay. Bonus stats within a crowd? No, I think I want to put it that, like, any time he'll have a group of people around him, right? So, I want to try to think of something that would, be the name of that. One of... Yeah, I think I'll do a 1d4. Nearly always with a small crowd. Of people who admire him. At any given time, when in public, Brahm has 1d4 friends at his side. Use I don't think it's gang member. What is it's like a CR-18. Bandit. Yeah. What kind of weapon does Brahm have? A whip? A hammer? A fucking hammer, huh? I'm okay with that. Like, what kind of hammer? Like a work around the house hammer or like a cleric hammer? Or like a blacksmith hammer? Blacksmith. Melee weapon, we're going to give it 1d8 plus 4 because of his strength. One d4 bludgeoning damage. Oh, yeah, so you mean like a rider's crop. I don't think we mean like a long whip. We mean some sort of riding crop. Ooh. I'm reading up on this. Okay. We're going to give him a riding crop. We'll give him melee weapon attack and a reach of 10 feet. Hit does 1 plus 4. We'll do a loaded riding crop. 1 does 5 damage. All right. I think we have it. He's just a simple NPC. So we do extra damage to the back of enemies, right? No. I think that all damage is sort of carried across. It's sort of universal no matter where you get hit in Dungeons and Dragons. So I think it's okay. Yeah, I think we're going to leave this here for now. I'm going to edit this down and I will put this into the share drive. You can see the share drive is now below. It has a link down below. You can see any of these there. We're going to keep on putting the dates and times that we do these and putting the streams on there. So I really appreciate you coming down. Next week, we're going to come back and we're going to build the characters of the Headless Horseman and Ichabod Crane, and one other was the Lady in White that we want to build next week. So we'll do a little bit of a reading summary on Ichabod Crane and his attempted escape from the Headless Horseman. And then we're going to check out to see what goes on down the road. And we'll do that next week. And then I'll announce next week what we're going to read the following week and so on and so forth. So I really appreciate you guys coming down tonight. We're going to raid the Liching Hour now. So y'all just hang out for just a few minutes. And I will see you all next week. Thank you again for coming by and hanging out. Please sure, if you haven't done so, to join the Discord. Click like and click on the bell to make sure you get a notification when I go live. I'll probably stream again before next Tuesday, but join the Discord, as V has just linked it there. And I will see you all very, very soon. Let's get our raid command going here. Hang out. And go over to the Liching Hour. Give them a follow as well if you haven't already. There's our raid. Thank you all for joining along, and I will see you all next week. Goodbye, everybody.